Baruch Ben Yosef, the other alleged assassin of Alex Zaudeh. So, he also spawned a protege. I don't know if you recognize them. This is an older photo of the two of them together. This is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He started out from his early days as a Kahanist. And in fact, a year after the Goldstein massacre, he dressed up as Goldstein, as an homage to him, And he said, for decades afterwards, he actually had a photograph of Goldstein on his living room wall with a picture of the Cave of the Patriarchs, the Ibrahimi Mosque in the background, and the minaret being toppled. He said, one day in a few decades, there'll be a Goldstein street. Baruch Goldstein will also be a hero. So, I should also point out that, of course, he was a big insider, one of those who confronted Rabin at every stretch of the game in his last days on earth. And he famously said on Israeli TV, without any shame, he jumped onto Rabin's motorcade and snatched the Cadillac symbol off, and he said, just as we got to this symbol, we can get to Rabin. And sure enough, days later, a Kahanist did so. Now, this is a little vignette just to give you a sense of how far Israeli society has shifted, right? Because that's what we're talking about, how things have changed, how far gone we are. So at that time, in this era, in the 1990s, Ben-Gvir is already becoming a media darling, and he's invited on to talk shows. This is a popular Israeli political talk show called Popolitika. So he comes on the show, and another guest on the panel was this man. He's the editor of a major Israeli newspaper. And again, a secular nationalist. At that point, Kahanism was hated by, polite society. And so he said to Ben-Gvir on the panel, little Itamar, that Nazi, shut your mouth, you dirty Nazi. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, that's an insult. So Itamar Ben-Gvir took him to court. How dare you call me a Nazi? How dare you defame me? And so, with the help of his teacher, Baruch Ben Yosef, they took it to court. And they sued him. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it was a really, really interesting case. In the end, the Supreme Court said, well, look, admittedly, he did defame you. He called you a Nazi, and you're not a Nazi. On the other hand, Kahanism is pretty damn close to Nazism. We're talking about a hair's breadth away. So, all right, fair enough, we'll rule in your favor. He's guilty of libeling you. But the punishment we'll mete out to him will be only 1 shekel, which is the equivalent of an American quarter. So by this, they were saying, okay, you're not a Nazi, but you're like Nazi adjacent, essentially. Now, this is back in the day, right? We're going back 2 decades to understand how they were framed back then. Today, that same newspaper, whose editor was sued by the Kahanists, that newspaper, Ma'ariv, publishes glowing interviews with Baruch Ben Yosef, interview all about Haram al-Sharif and the Dome of the Rock and the temple that they want to build there on its ruins. And in this entire 45-minute interview, they don't once mention the fact that he tried to blow it up. You might think that would be a relevant factor. That's how far gone we are. The editor of the newspaper once called them a Nazi. Now they give them free license to whitewash their records and preach Al-Aqsa destructionism. That's where we are today. Now, this is the best they can do. Call him a right-wing activist. Someone who wants to genocide the non-Jews in the country. A right-wing activist. So, of course, Ben-Gvir learned well from him. Went on to, terrorize the local Palestinian population in Hebron where he lives. But he learned from Ben Yosef how to become a lawyer. He interned in his office. He did a stage with him in his law office. And now he's become a lawyer unto himself. And he's taken over a lot of Ben Yosef's casework, defending Kahanist killers, like the killers of the Dawabsha family. Defending him in court. Defending in court not just the murderers of the Dawabsha family, but those who celebrate the murders of the Dawabsha family, like these Kahanists at a wedding, if you can imagine this, here's Ben-Gvir, and here are the Kahanists holding up a photograph of one-year-old baby Ali Dawabsheh that they burned to death, and holding up a Molotov cocktail and stabbing the photo of Ali Dawabsheh. This is how they celebrate their marriages in the Kahana movement. So these are the kinds of people that Ben-Gvir defends. But Ben-Gvir's biggest contribution, we can say, to the Israeli discourse, and how we can say he differs from Kahana, if there's a way that they differ, it's that he realized the loophole, what he needed to do to get around the legal framework that was foisted on Kahana to prevent his power base from actualizing his goals. And that is, you can't actually say, kill the Arabs. I mean, Mavet la'Aravim, death to the Arabs, is like very commonly heard amongst right-wingers when they're marching through East Jerusalem trying to drive Palestinians out. But when Ben-Gvir is in the mix, and I've heard this many times and I've recorded him many times doing this, when he hears a group of people, throngs of Kahanists screaming, death to the Arabs, he'll say, no, death to the terrorists. By changing the word, you can avoid being charged by if you say death to the Arabs, it's not going to happen. The police aren't going to be too quick to do it, but there's a possibility that you could be charged. All you got to do is just say death to the terrorists, and everyone understands what you're talking about. So by just adding that little twist, he's able to fly under the radar. So instead of saying, he'll say expel the enemies, not don't expel the Palestinians, expel the enemies. And in this way, he is able to wiggle into the Israeli mainstream. And this is what he's done with the help of Netanyahu. As I mentioned, as long as Netanyahu was in power, he was driving the government full tilt to the far right. But when he came up on corruption charges, all of a sudden his power base started to shift beneath his feet, and it looked like he might lose his seat. And then he realized the only way to keep it, or he thought he might do so, was by re-mainstreaming the Kahana movement, bringing them into the Knesset, and that's what he did. And now the leader of the Kahanist party, the Jewish Power Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is a member of the Knesset. He too sits in the Knesset. And here's some of the Israeli political cartoonists, so it's not just in my imagination. And here's several story high poster, so you can see that they actually ran together. They actually co-promoted each other in the run-up to elections. They co-branded. And because their bases are very close. This is what we've come to, that the ruling Likud party has become Kahanist. It's not only the Moshe Feiglin faction. They've actually gobbled up the rest of the party as well. And so now this is our new reality. And now that he's in the Knesset, he has immunity. A Knesset member is able to get away with things that ordinary citizens aren't. And he uses that position in order to incite further violence and race wars. And again, it's not only the Likud party, because what we see now is not only the secular nationalists, but even the religious parties that traditionally made a pretense of being pacifists. Since Ben-Gvir was elected to the Knesset, you have the religious parties embracing him as well. Here is the leader of the United Torah Judaism Party. These are the religious, ultra-Orthodox Jews representing Northern European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, hand in hand with Ben-Gvir. Here you have Aryeh Deri, the head of the Shas party, the party representing ultra-Orthodox Sfaradi Jews, Jews from Southern Europe and from the Middle East, embracing Ben-Gvir. So the religious parties have fully welcomed him into the fold. The Kahana ideology is the driving force on the Israeli right, without question. And as I said, the Likud party itself is paying him utmost respect, coming out to his political events. He's the one leading them in the field, taking the fight to the front. Israeli ministers posing with him, paying him respects, showing him support publicly. And now he's using that to further incite race hatred, whether it's in Khalil, whether it's in Jerusalem, at Bab al-Amud, at the Damascus Gate, leading hundreds, thousands of right-wing Jews on a march to spit in the faces of the Palestinians living there, screaming death to the Arabs, going up on Haram al-Sharif, inciting Jews to go up there with the intention of eventually taking it over. And perhaps the most horrific, the Kahanist movement operating networks, social networks, where on WhatsApp and on Telegram and other platforms, they organize people to head into those few cities in Israel where it's not 99% Jews or 99% Palestinians, but those few cities where you actually have Jews and Palestinians living side by side, sending them to those areas and inciting race riots, inciting anti-Palestinian pogroms, planning them and distributing weapons so that they'll come stocked. According to Israel's police chief, what happened last May was that Ben-Gvir incited, in his words, a Jewish intifada. And the second last thing I'm going to show you is what that looked like. I know it's really difficult to look at, and I'm just giving you a heads up. It's not easy. But it's important that we look at this and not look away. This is what that looked like in practice. This is just south of liberal Tel Aviv, just south of Jaffa, okay? In the city of Bat Yam, just down the coast. Picturesque town on the Mediterranean. And Kahanists and other far-right Israelis swarmed the area in last May, and they just attacked any place of business that they suspected might be owned by a Palestinian person, or where there might be Palestinian people working. Whether it was a shawarma restaurant or it was an ice cream store, and they just smashed, smash, without warning. Masked, unmasked, people came in and just wreaked havoc every which way. And as you can see, it wasn't confined to young men. There were young women there as well, celebrating this as a victory for the state of Israel. Screaming, crowds marching through the streets, screaming, Mavet l'Arabim, death to the Arabs. Sheisaref lachem akfar, may your village burn. Ma ratzitem lasig? Yatzanu la'archovot. What was your goal? We came to fight with the Arabs. We're now looking at a pogrom that's being live streamed in real time. This is our new reality, live streaming pogroms. Im tzarich gam narog otam. If needed, we'll kill them. If needed, we'll murder them. This is Israel's national broadcaster interviewing him on live TV. They ask, are you Arab? Are you Arab or not? And once they get the answer, they would stop cars in the middle of the street, any passing car. And of course, it's impossible to tell a Jew from a Palestinian in most cases, because half of the Jews in Israel are themselves Arab Jews, or from Middle Eastern countries. So you can't tell straight off the block. So you ask a question to hear their response. Are you Arab? And once the answer is clear that maybe you're not Jewish, that's when they attack. And they pull people out of their cars, and they go to work on them. And they beat them, and they beat them, and they beat them. And they kick them, and they punch them with sticks, and with poles, and with flags, until they're bloody, and they're bleeding, and until they're lifeless, and not moving. And in the end, they chant, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish nation lives. And the next day, the sun rises, and back to normal, as if we didn't just witness a live stream pogrom. This is our new reality. This was not some small town in the middle of nowhere. This is in the heart of the Israeli metropole. Now, the last thing I'll say, just to bring you up to date, to understand how far gone we really are in this country. It's not just that you can see a street named after Kahana. It's not just that you can mail letters with a stamp of Kahana. It's not only the right. It's mainstream, it's the middle, it's the center, it's all the Israeli news outlets and media sites that give him the platform, that give the Kahanists open mics. I mean, statistically, maybe the prime minister gets more airtime. After that, it's the Kahanist Ben-Gvir who gets the most invitations to come speak on the panels. He's the one who gets the platform that's the largest of all the Israeli politicians, if you can imagine that. He's the most popular.